the onslaught did not miss its mark. By now, Germany's war losses in weapons and equipment were so enormous as to defy estimate. The summer months alone had taken over 1 million German casualties, and now new and uncounted numbers pressed the total to nearer 4 million since the war began. Yet they fought back. Their communications shattered, their supply lines smashed. They returned the attack with a ferocity that seemed whetted by their losses. This was no fairy tale. This was no myth. 10,000 tons of bombs had been dropped on the German defenses, but still the Germans replied. From the Allied Supreme Command down to the exhausted GI, it had not even the fairy tale's horrifying logic. It was war. War demanding new men, new courage, and giving nothing in return, but those demands pressed harder. Hopes for the sweeping success of the great November offensive had been swallowed, just as the Hurtgen Forest swallowed new reserves and asked for more. It was war that demanded casualties any way it could get them, and the winter became as vicious an enemy as any lurking behind the trees. In the Hurtgen Forest, it was war where battle tactics lost their meaning, where gains were still measured in yards, in feet, in dead. Still, they were gains. And while battle strategies might founder, the inexorable rules of war would demand that either advance or retreat must eventually prevail. Even in the Hurtgen Forest, one of those must prevail. It was advance. Beyond it, each unit, each man advanced on his own terms, trampling the bleak fragments of a myth that fled before every step he took forward, as though it had never existed. As though nothing but cold and mud had ever existed. Beyond the Hurtgen Forest, war became human again, but that did not defeat it. And as though there were not already enough desolation and waste and sheer loss of everything to be valued, there was always another engagement, another pocket of desperation, defending what was already lost. And there was the cold, echoing in desolate wastes of roads and towns and people in ruin, the hollow entreaties of defeat. dragon teeth, the barbed wire and hidden guns of the Sigfried Line were behind, where the Hurtgen forest nightmare lay at last, splintered and torn open to what winter sunlight there was. 3 months had passed since the first patrols had pierced that frontier, but even now, these two American armies were barely 22 miles inside Germany. The November offensive was 3 weeks old when the 9th Army reached the Roer River, its swollen waters ready to flood the plain if either side had burst the dams hidden high in the Hurtgen forest. A week later, a long week of hard fighting, because no one could have named its end. The First Army broke through to the Roer River, and the plain opened out toward the Rhine, where hope lay that war, even this war, might end. The Siegfried Line campaign was a part of history, but was it a part, and perhaps, after all, the real part of war?
24th March. The actual crossing of the Rhine already is in full swing. Men of the 30th Division are taken over in LCVPs. General Simpson's forces make the southernmost crossing below Wesel. Farther north, Lieutenant General Dempsey's British Second Army and Canadian troops are strengthening the bridgehead on the Westphalian Plain. Army engineers and Navy crews cooperate for these crossings. The engineers launch the craft and furnish guides, and the sailors operate them, applying lessons learned in weeks of practice. A jeep with ammunition trailer comes ashore, followed by reinforcements of all types for advance elements moving beyond the east bank of the Rhine. Operations are reported proceeding according to plan, with our troops well into the first German defensive positions north of the Ruhr. First glider landings near Brünnen, Germany, in the Wesel area on the Rhine's far bank. Coming in after Marshal Montgomery's columns have been launched across the Rhine, these units have the immediate objective of seizing high ground around Wesel. A junction with the American and British troops is made 6 hours after the airborne troops commence to land. To the south, the 4th Armored Division, spearheading General Patton's Rhine push, passes liberated forced laborers. The disorder of the German retreat is made evident by groups of Nazis giving themselves up without offering resistance. This dash by the 4th Armored precedes the final battle for the Saar-Moselle-Rhine Triangle and Third Army crossings of the Rhine. The town of Weissenturm, Germany, is littered with equipment of every description, abandoned by the Nazis as they were backed up to the river. A preponderance of horses, dead and alive, adds to the scene of confusion. Disorder at the Rhine bank, where Nazi stragglers wait to be moved to prisoner cages. The 4th Armored alone captures more than 4,000 prisoners in its drive through the West German hills. Meanwhile, 1st Army artillery shells the town of Horningen, Germany, across the Rhine. This is in support of an infantry division moving along the east bank from the Remagen bridgehead 7 miles north. On 16th March, a treadway bridge is used by troops consolidating positions across the Rhine. General Hodge's army, driving for the central German plain, also employs Navy craft to move up reinforcements. LCVPs transport men of the 1st Infantry Division to Scheuren, Germany, northeast of Remagen. Sailors of Navy units attached to the 1st Army operate the craft. The Navy began operations in this area 48 hours after the Army's seizure of the Ludendorff Bridge. In addition, supplies are ferried across the Rhine in ducks. 2 amphibious truck companies, one a Negro outfit, man the amphibious vehicles on the runs to and from Unkel, Germany. Prisoners of war and empty gasoline containers are carted by the ducks on their return trips. The Ludendorff Bridge across the Rhine at Remagen. For 10 days, it withstands aerial attacks and constant artillery fire while First Army troops exploit the initial breaching of the Rhine River line. Traffic in the face of the attacks must be kept to proper intervals between vehicles. A convoy of ponton equipment is ready to be unloaded for engineer battalions who begin construction despite the enemy raids. Normally a 34-hour job, the bridging operations are hours behind as Nazi fire flares up repeatedly. Under heavy enemy fire, combat engineers out on the incompleted span dash back to shore. Despite these attacks, the first ponton bridge is completed and handling heavy traffic on 14th March. Armor is raced across the new link as the Remagen bridgehead begins expanding into a wide front. Both the ponton span and the adjacent Ludendorff bridge are still under enemy fire. The engineer battalion working on the Ludendorff strengthens the roadbed, which was improvised to allow vehicles to travel over the railway ties. Damaged structural members of the bridge are removed by engineers. But weakened by the cumulative damage, the Ludendorff collapses on 17th March while about 300 engineer troops are working on it. Many of them are hurled into the swift icy water or crushed by the falling structure. Rescue crews save those who managed to cling to sections of the span as it gave way. Rescuers swim out into the Rhine to reach injured men kept afloat by driftwood. Bringing out a line to pull in the surviving engineers. Quick action of this type saves many lives. When the 512-foot center span of the Ludendorff gave way, there was no vehicular traffic crossing the bridge. Crews extricate bodies pinned beneath the heavy beams. Three days later, on 20th March, Supreme Headquarters announces that the collapsed Ludendorff Bridge has been abandoned. The dispatch says that the span is no longer necessary because of the existence of other facilities across the Rhine into the Remagen bridgehead.